Thank you. Mercedes.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me back. I have two questions, if you'll indulge me. The first question is for NFUS, because we've heard this morning that the organisation believes that the focus needs to be on actions, not outcomes. And I think also I heard that NFUS doesn't want to see targets on the face of the bill. So I wanted to ask, because we heard this committee took evidence from the Scottish Government when the bill was introduced, and what the Scottish Government has said is that their view is that targets are a key way to drive action, and they've said that they already have a strategy and they have 6-year delivery plans, and so the idea is that the framework, the third part of their biodiversity framework will be this bill with its statutory targets, and that third element, along with the strategy and the delivery plans, that having those statutory targets are going to be how we actually drive that action forward. And so my question for NFUS is, if you disagree with that, and it sounds like you do, how do you see, or what do you see as the best way to drive that action, given that there's already the strategy and the delivery plans? If not statutory targets, then what?
So, yeah, you're right. We do disagree with that. And for a number of reasons that I've already outlined, we think that because nature and biodiversity are so complex, that setting them on a statutory footing could actually lead to potentially counterproductive or unintended consequences.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just clarify? So the question was, if not statutory targets, then what? As you said, you've outlined your reasons why you oppose statutory targets. Those are on the record. But what would you like to see instead in order to drive that action forward?
So I think it relates to the answer to the last question. It's that framework that incentivises farmers and crofters to do more for nature and climate. As I've said, farmers' primary aim is to produce food. That's what they're here for, and that's what we need in this country. And going forward, they are also are being asked to do more for climate, more for nature. They are already doing a lot for climate and nature. We have the whole farm plan requirements that have came in this year, but there's still some uncertainty around certain aspects of the Agriculture and Rural Communities Act. There's still uncertainty around certain aspects of the different tiers and how that will support farmers and crofters to do more. So really it is about providing that framework, the investment, the funding, support, not just financial, but also advisory as well for farmers and crofters to make those decisions. So they're absolutely willing and they want to do more, but they have so many different priorities, so many competing priorities. So it really is that framework of support and that incentivisation to do more. And we think that's absolutely fair. There's a lot that farmers and crofters deliver that is in the public interest, and having support and help to do that, I think, is the right way to go about this. It empowers them to do this, whereas statutory targets, it may be quite binary, it may be quite black and white, and that might lead to kind of unintended consequences or adverse outcomes for our members.
So is there something that this government can do with this bill to support farmers to drive forward that action? Or is it more, it sounds like you're saying it's more around making sure that what's in place is clearer? Or
yeah, in terms of the Agriculture and Rural Communities Act, we need to see clarity on the different tiers in that bill. We don't have all the detail yet. In terms of this bill, we think that can come through the secondary legislation and the consulting on what that's going to look like. We are not shying away from responsibilities around biodiversity and climate, but we don't want to have arbitrary targets that can maybe adversely impact other outcomes. So it is about alignment, but it's not about the face of the bill and tying things into legislation that could have adverse outcomes. It's about looking at things on the round, making sure there's alignment, making sure there's consultation, and crucially making sure that there's flexibility if something isn't going in the right direction.
Thank you. I think I also heard you touch on investment, which relates to my second question, which is a wider one for the panel, which is that when the government was working on this bill, I know that there was, I think, 7 topics that were identified by the programme advisory group. and only 3 of those topics are actually being taken forward in the bill. One of the topics that is not being taken forward was investment in biodiversity, and I heard it mentioned by a few of our panellists today. I think CIEM said that you'd like to see targets as a driver for investment in biodiversity. I think SPF spoke about local authorities not having the resources. And I think maybe it was CIEM as well, spoke about the 22% of planning authorities don't have access to biodiversity expertise. So it seems like there's a funding gap. So my question is whether you believe that this protection and restoration can happen without public investment, and how likely you think these statutory targets or these outcomes can be delivered without a statutory target on public investment. Basically, what's your view on the lack of a target on public investment in the bill as introduced?
I would say, so Saim hasn't commented specifically on that point, but you know, there is a clear resource gap in our existing delivery of biodiversity. By having statutory targets, you have that legal incentive for a combination of public and private investment in nature restoration that will aid that delivery. And it does need to be a combination of investment. There are private organisations such as Send Transmission already investing significant amounts in nature restoration, but they need the certainty, as do planners working within development control, that what they're investing in or what's being invested in is actually going to be achievable. So that's one driver for having statutory targets, is you've got that legal driver for having public and private investment, but also, you know, as we've touched on in our response and in some of the points I made today, those targets do need to be clearly linked to some of the existing pieces, including the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy and the delivery plan. And there needs to be a very clear plan for monitoring and adaptation of targets where the evidence from that monitoring shows that perhaps we do need to make a change. So we wouldn't suggest having rigidly imposed targets, because it's a changing world. You know, I've seen a number of times in my career where targets for restoration of a site have been set, and then, you know, unexpected factors came up that meant that perhaps that wasn't the best target to have set in the first place.
And do we need a target for investment specifically? Because the Scottish Government said that it believes there's a risk of potentially perverse outcomes, such as a risk of potential greenwashing. So I'd be interested to hear panellists' views on whether a target for investment would be helpful.
I'm going to ask panellists to be incredibly brief. I have not chaired this first section particularly well. We are considerably over time, so we're going to have to cut it incredibly fine. We've effectively got 5 minutes for another 20 questions. So can I ask you to keep your responses as tight as possible, please?
I think avoiding the risk of greenwashing comes through engaging the right scientific expertise to set and meet those targets.